We're now streaming live on Facebook, so I wanted to welcome everybody to the show today. We have 1 minute until the start of the program. If you have any questions, feel free to do so through the chat box. We'll start here momentarily.
Hey, John.
Hey, hi, Chris.
I love your cabin.
We have two cabins in our background, three cabins now in our backgrounds. I wanted to welcome everybody to today's program. We have a lineup of 4 speakers today, so we're really looking forward to this. You'll notice that there's a few things I wanted to tell you about before we start the program. First, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. And joining next to me as a co-host today is
Chris French, and I'm Director of Development and Marketing, and welcome to our last webinar of 2020.
And so before we start the program, we're going to jump right into a few logistical things. First of all, if you have any questions, you can just use the chat box. So you would click the chat button at the bottom, ask us that question, and Chris and I will moderate that for our speakers if you'd like us to ask them questions. Second is we encourage active participation. So if you have any comments, you can also use that chat box as often and as frequently as you'd like. You'll notice on your screen that you can move around the video, you can change the view, feel free to do so. Before we get started today, I wanted to pull up some slides, and Chris, while I'm doing that, could you just kind of briefly introduce today's program?
Oh, yeah. So don't start sharing your screen yet, John, because I want to try a new trick for all our friends here on Zoom. And first, why doesn't everybody go ahead and start using that chat box and go and log in where you're calling in from. We have been getting people from all over the country and even internationally on some of our webinars. So, and then Lloyd, you can go ahead and turn your camera off. We're going to get to you in just 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to try a little thing and see if we can manufacture this for you all. Real quick.
So while you're doing that, we have just kind of to read some of the people and where they're from. We have people from Santa Barbara, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Orange, San Clemente, Phoenix, Arizona, Mount Baldy, California, Glendale, North.
Oh, that's my hometown, Glendale. Let's see if I get my right file here. Okay. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you everybody for joining us. This will be the last broadcast that we have for 2020, but John and I have a lot of fun and exciting things in store. We want to thank our sponsors. You can see ZFA is right behind my head there. And we like to thank our sponsors. It's our sponsors who actually help us provide all of this programming for you for free. And we wanted to remind you that our awesome auction, this is the last day. This is one of the fundraisers that also helps us keep this programming for free and helps us bring in great speakers and just keep the doors open, I guess you could say, right, John? So there's some good things there. The auction goes until midnight tonight, and you can find that on our website, californiapreservation.org. And also a reminder that the other programs in this series are all available on our Facebook and our YouTube sites, because we do record everything so you can watch it later. Oh, I had one more to show you. I forgot.
Okay.
Let's see. These are our guests for today. And we want to thank especially Zach Klein, who's over here, Mariah, Lloyd and Mariah, and all of them for spending time with us today. And this is the last thing I wanted to show, that you can actually get 25% off of this Gingerbread House book. The code is valid at gingerbreadhousebook.com. Hey, that was fun. Okay, let me stop sharing and you can go ahead and get started, John.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly share my screen here and we'll open it up for Zach Klein to talk with us. As many of you know, today's program is briefly entitled Cabin Fever. but I think we tongue-in-cheek called this program "I've Got a Fever," and the prescription is more cabins. And I think some of you may know the Saturday Night Live reference. I think possibly, but I'll play it. Hopefully the sound works. I may have forgotten to. Wait, you know what? I'm gonna share my sound here. I may have forgotten to do that. Let me do that.
And we'll get you a presentation screen. Zach, why don't you tell us real quick about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so, I guess I'm here because I authored a book called Cabin Porn, which we published after 10 years of running a blog and Instagram account of the same name. And over the past 10 years, we've had more than 15,000 people submit homes that they've built themselves to us. And we have published, I think, about 2,200 of them. I run this community as a hobby to inspire people to make their own homes. By day, I'm the CEO of Dwell, and I am based out of San Francisco.
Perfect. And to entree into this.
Guess what? I got a fever. And the only prescription is more cowbell.
So we are replacing that cowbell with cabins today. And I wanted to we're going to talk with Zach here about his project, which started, was it 2015, Zach, that this happened?
Are you talking about my actual cabin project or Cabin Porn?
The property that you found in New York, 55.
Yeah, that was in 2010. So I had been living in New York City for a decade. I actually grew up in upstate New York in Buffalo. And I found 50 acres of woods about 2 hours from the city. And over the last 10 years, my friends and I have been building what to the concern of many of my rural neighbors looks like a commune, but it's really just a place for us amateurs to experiment with building. For a number of summers, I ran something there called the Beaverbrook School, in which we taught amateurs how to build a building in 10 days from scratch using Japanese timber framing methods. And so now it's largely just a retreat for me and about 10 families that we're really close to, and you raise our kids there and spend a lot of time outside.
It sounds like a wonderful project, sort of a DIY self-starter project, but it couldn't be done without community. I was really interested in the titles of your book, the headings for the chapters, and how you started with community and how it took a group of people to sort of build this, and the whole saga of finding this place. I think briefly we're going to very quickly jump into some of the images inside of your book and talk a little bit about these. If you have a memory of why you chose this particular example for your project, I know you went through something like 12,000 images for this book, so I know you may not remember what the particular details of some of these, but we wanted to show our audience some of these. If you have something to mention about some of these images, feel free. But while we're sort of cycling through these images.
I started Cabin Porn 10 years ago, truly as a private collection to inspire the buildings that we might build at our property in upstate New York. And I posted them, and I eventually made it public, and it caught people's attention. And since then, it's just sort of snowballed. There's millions of people that visit it every year. I was focusing on architecture that was very specific to upstate New York. Like this is a sugar house near Lake George in upstate New York, which is a vernacular I'm really excited about. I love making maple syrup. And so initially the scope of the project was very narrow. It was mostly the Northeast. But as we gained an international following, about 55% of our readers are actually based in Europe and Australia. We started getting submissions from all over, and started expanding what we were publishing. So that first image you posted that kind of looked like a Transylvanian castle is from Eastern Europe. And it's been really interesting experience for me, getting to know folk architecture especially from Europe, which has a very long history of obviously handmade homes.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll ask you about your project in New York again. Was this something that you sort of learned on the fly? Did you have a background in building or architecture or design prior to this?
It's really the synthesis of a lot of things. I'm an outdoorsy guy. I was an Eagle Scout. I always imagined that I never, that I would spend a substantial amount of my time in life outdoors. I'm deeply inspired, and I'm happiest when I'm outside. But I prefer to live in cities. I get energy from people. I love serendipity of cities. But unfortunately, cities are really difficult to change. They're especially for an amateur. Zoning and building and just the cost of construction makes it difficult for me to, as a citizen, to change my built environment. And I think that was the primary allure of the Project Upstate, was that it was very affordable and risk-free to experiment with creating a built environment. And so that novelty was also really attractive to a lot of people that I knew in the city, and it was a chance for us to make a place rather than having to live within the one we find in the city.
That's great, Zach. I wanted to let you know that we have been posting the links to Dwell and also your cabin porn while you've been talking. I find it so interesting that you find that freedom in these outdoor areas, but you wouldn't find that in the city. I think that's also the case with Lloyd, who is one of our guests coming up. And so what would your next adventure be then in this kind of outdoors cabin realm?
Yeah, so what's my next adventure? So, I think the most interesting part about Beaverbrook in particular, that's the name of the property upstate, has been, actually trying to manage the rules of a little micro society. Because you have 20 different people with different motives and intentions and abilities, and we're all sharing the space and living in it. And because the cost to try anything is so low, everything does get attempted, and that inevitably creates conflict. So we end up recreating some of the rules that you would find in in a municipality to govern how things are built. That's just sort of developed over a decade. Though I didn't really go into it with very much experience for how to participate in a community like that. It just sort of happened. And so I'm interested to participate in another intentional community, and plan one deliberately from the outset. Beaverbrook now is really just, it's a family retreat, and for a bunch of friends, and it functions more like a sort of weekend home than anything. But I'm interested to participate in a community that has a much more full-time commitment.
Great. Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate your time today. I know we're sort of on a schedule here, but if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can find you. Chris mentioned your book, put a link to your book, and then also to Dwell. And I understand you work at Dwell now. Are you an editor or?
I'm the CEO.
He's the CEO. We are talking to the CEO of Dwell, which is such an honor, by the way, Zach. Yeah, you've had such an impact on design, I think, nationwide and internationally. And so it's a real honor to have you on our CPF webinar today.
Thank you for your time.
Happy to chat with anyone offline. I'm on Twitter. Handle is Zach Klein. So please reach out.
I was going to ask that. Okay.
Anything I can answer.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm putting that right in the chat box. Thank you so much, Zach, for
I don't know if we're segueing to Lloyd, but I just wanted to shout out to Lloyd, because Lloyd's been a huge inspiration for me. He's the grandfather of Cabin Publications and has deeply influenced my work, and so it's an honor to be on this panel with him.
I've just asked Lloyd to go ahead and start his video if he wants, so we could, so you guys could talk for a second. I also was reading about Lloyd's history, and I said to John, this is amazing that you've gotten these two guests together at the same time, because this is just an incredible union of all the interests that you both have.
Well, anyway, thank you, Zach. And I want to say that when I first saw Cabin Porn, I was knocked out by it, the way that he had these large photos from side to side on the screen. And it caused me to redesign our blog, my blog, which I'm not very active with right now. But anyway, thank you for what you just said.
All right. Well, take care, Lloyd.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks
Okay,
for joining, Zach.
thank you, Zach. Lloyd, we have your slides up, and I've passed off control to our screen to you. So if you have any issues, just let me know. You should be able to advance them.
Yeah. Do you want me to just start with these images, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is. Can you see my cursor here on the screen?
No, we can't. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, then, anyway, this is a drawing by an artist named David Wills of our half-acre compound here. And in the foreground, next to the skateboard, is our office. And where I'm standing right now is where the woman in the orange dress is. And the house is at the upper left with the tower. And over on the right is the garden. And on the right, also on the right, that building with the sloping roof is my shop. And so let's see to go to the next one. Let's see if I press something here, if this is
Let
going
me
to
know
work.
when to advance things, and I'll do that
Okay.
for you. Yeah.
So I'm going to have to ask you, okay, this is our home. And we just did a book. So I've been publishing books on building for about 50 years now. And this is our house, which was built in stages. The part of it, the part of it that's the part of it that you see in front of you is the kitchen and the living room, and the tower is where we sleep up on the second story. There used to be a dome here, and I ended up finding out that after publishing a book called Dome Book 2, which sold 160,000 copies, I concluded the domes didn't work. And so by that time, my dome had been in Life magazine. Anyway, I took it down and sold it to somebody and rebuilt the house as you see it here. Okay, next. Okay, here's the interior of the house. We just sort of have, shot these photos just without staging things. So it maybe looks a little messy, but it's real. Okay, the next one. That's our dining nook. That all the tables in the house I made out of a recycled Douglas fir wood. And we look out these windows at birds. And here's the kitchen area. And then the next one shows the drying rack. Okay, there's a close up of the kitchen. The drying rack on the right, which where we wash the dishes in the sink and then rinse them and put them up to dry, and they stay there. Okay, the next one. There's a close-up of the rack. It was built by Lou Lewandowski, my friend and a carpenter. Next. So anyway, these are all in the book, The Half-Acre Homestead, by the way. Here's our pantry, grains and grain grinder and jams and everything that's sort of needs to be cool. And then the next one. Leslie bakes all of our breads, all sourdough. We haven't bought bread for like 10 years. And the next pizza. These are all things that we show in the book. In the book, we show waffles made with oat flour. You can just kind of go through these things, and I don't have to say next each time, but just, there's maybe, okay, dessert with berries from the garden. Sushi, Leslie makes sushi. This is a grinder that makes oat flakes out of oat groats, and we use this every couple of days to make cereal. Put the grains or groats in the top, turn the handle, and they come out flattened, and then we cook them for breakfast. I'm also become a forager. There's some porcinis.
Yeah.
How much time have we got left? Here's Leslie with, I collect seaweed and grind it up and put it on food as like salt. How much time have we got left here?
We have about 5 to 10 minutes, but closer to 5 if possible.
Okay, so we should go through these pretty fast. I'm not sure how many there. We're probably halfway through them. Let's keep going. Okay, raspberry jam. The solar, about 2 years ago, we put in solar panels for photovoltaic electricity. And so our electric bills are now minus every month. Feed it back into the PG&E grid. This is a little place, the most recent thing I built with the curved roof. It's 10 by 10, but because of the curve and because of windows at eye level, it feels much bigger inside. Here's the office where I am now. So a 50 foot commute from the house. Here's the chicken coop with a living roof. And here's a greenhouse with a double wall panels on the plastic panels on the top and used windows on the front. Here's raised beds on the right. You see those raised beds with protections for strawberries from the birds, and a hoop greenhouse, which I got from FarmTek, FarmTek. Very quick, very minimal materials. The shop in the background. There's things, a lot of pictures of the birds and the insects and wild creatures that visit our land. There's my friend Billy with Dungeness crab. Well, at one time I had chickens, bees, and goats. And goats, dairy animals are really a lot of work. And so after about 5 years, I got rid of the goats, and then the bees, we didn't really eat that much honey, but the chickens we've had all along. They're just a wonderful part of our setup here and our diet. Pond outside with fish in it. I have a friend, a scrub jay, who I've trained to take peanuts out of my hand. And so he actually right now he's a little bit angry at me because I cut down the tree that he used to take off from to get the peanut. But it's wonderful to have any kind of interaction with wild animals. We're on a half acre of land. We're about an hour from San Francisco. There's turkey buzzards drying their wings out. Here's a visitor to our pond. Very wary birds, the great blue herons. There's one of Leslie's quilts. There's a lot of stuff in the book on Leslie and her quilts and her weavings and the pine needle baskets and jewelry, other things that she makes. There she is at her loom. She's been doing mostly weaving lately. There's another table I made out of used Douglas fir. I did that table with a skill saw. I didn't really have any shop tools. A fox visitor. I think that's probably yeah, there's my messy shop. Well, let's go one more here. And so in the book, we show tools that we use in the kitchen and also tools, kind of unusual tools. This is a tenon attachment for a drill that makes that tenon you see there. And then that's used as a cross piece in, say, making a chair or a table. But anyway, I think that's probably enough of the, if anybody wants to ask questions or if you want to talk about stuff, we could stop the slides there.
No, that's great, Lloyd. I think the images really helped illustrate some of your work and the process that you go through. Maybe we have a little bit of time for questions, about 2 to 3 minutes. So if people have questions, we can ask you that. But
I don't know if this shows up, but here's the book.
Homestead on his screen, and maybe Chris and I can share a link to that in a minute here. But let's talk while we're moving into the next session. I wanted to ask you, Lloyd, about the inspiration behind I mean, how long have you lived at the homestead for? How long have you lived at that half acre?
49 years now.
And
It was a
it's
vacant piece of land. And in the early 70s, there were like 35 people that were building their own homes in this town and around it. And the land was $6,000 and the building permit was $200. And I was allowed to draw my own plans, be my own architect and be my own engineer. And nowadays, you just can't do this nowadays. I mean, the building permits right now are $50,000 in Marin County. And so if you want to build your own house these days, you have to really go, you have to get a good distance away from any large city, maybe a couple of hours away. And I suggest to people that where back in the 60s, we wanted to have 10 acres in the country and build a log cabin or an adobe house. And nowadays, I'd look around in small towns and in cities for little houses that are neglected but have a solid foundation, and maybe the crack dealers have just been chased out of the neighborhood, and you can get homes cheaply and fix them up because you've got wiring and you got electricity and water and sewage there to start with. So that's another option for people who want to build their own homes nowadays. I just want to say this about domes. Dome Book 2 was a really popular book, and after 5 years of building domes and having my Dome in Life magazine, I decided they didn't work. I sold the dome, took it apart, and I decided that I had such a big audience that I better show people that there were other ways to build. And so that produced the book Shelter, which we did in 1973. And the heart of Shelter is 5 tiny homes that we drew every stick of wood in a flat roof, a shed roof, 2 gable roofs. And so that people could see how to build these. So that was a long time ago when that was the heart of the book Shelter, were tiny houses.
Great. Well, thank you for your time today, Lloyd. We're going to jump right into the next session. We will have Mariah speak to us about the work of her father. And can you tell us a little bit about the background? And I'll pull, it looks like you might be pulling up the slides yourself, Mariah. So while you're doing that, if you can multitask, tell us a little bit about your story and your book.
Sure. I'm here today to talk about my dad, David Gray. He was a builder and a stonemason builder and stonemason in the San Gabriel Valley for over 40 years. And together, he and I wrote a book called The Rockwork of David Gray and the Gingerbread House that started it all. So I'm here today to share a bit about the history of the gingerbread house, which is where I grew up, and to tell a little bit about my parents' journey in buying the home and rebuilding it in the 1970s. Unfortunately, I'm not at the cabin today as we sold it a few years ago, but the cabin still manages to surprise and delight hikers who venture back Barrett Canyon, which is where it's located, in Mount Baldy, about 90 minutes east of Los Angeles. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So the story of the gingerbread house begins like this. 2 men who never met each other built a house. One started it, the other finished it 45 years later. This is the story of that endeavor and of the appreciation for a dying art that grew out of it. Once upon a time, in an old Dodge pickup truck, my parents explored up a bumpy dirt road that traverses the cliffs of Mount Baldy. What they came upon that day amongst the alders and the pines was a magnificent half-finished cabin. It sat abandoned next to the remnants of another structure which had been burned beyond repair. A stone chimney and foundation were the only hints to the grandeur of what once stood beside the cabin. But before I tell the story of my parents, I must first introduce the man who laid the foundation to their story, George Kaiser. Kaiser immigrated to the United States in about 1910 from Germany. Trained in architecture, he found work as a Hollywood set designer. After a time, Kaiser decided to build a home in the San Gabriel Mountains. Starting in 1927, he worked tirelessly, slowly perfecting his home in Mount Baldy. By 1934, he had finished the main house, which you see here, that became known as the castle, and went to work on a second structure. It would be used as the garage and guest house and would eventually assume the nickname the Gingerbread House. After World War II, Kaiser's interest in the project dwindled, with the gingerbread house only half complete. After a devastating flood that barely missed the castle, the two buildings sat in neglect for nearly 30 years. And in 1970, the castle was broken into and burned down. George Kaiser passed away soon after the fire. The smaller, incomplete gingerbread house survived, but stood in neglect for another 5 years. Here we see some photos of the inside of the cabin as Kaiser left it. In 1975, my parents, David and Brenda Gray, drove up to Mount Baldy to visit a friend who owned a home in Barrett Canyon. Their friend told them they should check out the old abandoned fairy tale house just up the road. They did, and 1 week later, they had tracked down George Kaiser's widow, Alvina, and purchased the unfinished gingerbread house and what was left of the castle. So in this picture, you can see the gingerbread house behind my parents and the remains of the castle off to the right. Almost penniless, they set about tearing the place apart and putting it back together to suit them, but with the design philosophies of Kaiser in mind. With little but determination, they decided the best way to approach the project on a shoestring budget was to do everything themselves. Due to budget constraints, David was soon tearing apart abandoned barns, sheds, and buildings around the area for lumber and any other building materials they could reuse. A side note here to give you some perspective on my dad's resourcefulness. The treads of the spiral staircase shown on the left used to be the bleachers of the football stadium at Monrovia High School. And the marble floor in the kitchen was originally destined to become the elevator lobby in the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas. At the time, my dad worked as an estimator at a marble company. The truck transporting the marble was involved in an accident, and my dad gladly inherited the broken pieces and put them to good use. And I'm sure many of you might recognize these kitchen drawers on the right, salvaged from a Singer sewing machine. David and Brenda were forced to be resourceful with the natural building supplies that surrounded them in the forest. So David began building stone steps and walls around the yard as he could always find rocks from the nearby stream bed and money for sand and cement. In so doing, he began to closely examine the work of other older stonemasons for guidance. And here we see the two men who had a hand in building the gingerbread house. David Gray on the left and George Kaiser on the right, both looking out the same third floor window, approximately 35 years apart. Rebuilding the gingerbread house took my parents most every extra moment of 4 years, and they were able to begin using the cabin in 1979. And here we see the cabin as it stands today. Perimeter walls of George Kaiser's castle were retained for flood protection, and the interior walls were lined with my dad's stonework, converting what was the castle's living room into an outdoor gathering space. Here we see the third floor den at the top of the spiral staircase. The log crossbeam we see in the picture on the right was dug out of the nearby stream after a flood. And here's the kitchen on the left and a view up into the steepled roof above the spiral staircase. And if you look closely in the picture on the left, you'll see the marble floor that my dad got from the Tropicana, what was destined to be the Tropicana Hotel elevator lobby floor. And here we have various details showing the work that David did to honor the style and vision of George Kaiser, as well as a rock with googly eyes to clue you into my dad's sense of humor and lightheartedness. So what started as a 4-year project became a 40-year adventure for my parents. And the work David did on this cabin informed his career as a builder and a stonemason. The project was truly transformative, but only just the beginning for him. The book my dad and I wrote goes on to share a selection of David's work done between 1978 and 2013. And here's just a few. Some of his projects were quite grand, as you can see in this photo of a craftsman home designed by Hartman Baldwin in Laverne, California. Here's the central fireplace in that same home. And many of the projects David completed were quite whimsical, as you can see in this sculptural wall done in Claremont, California. I believe much of the lightness, playfulness, and character he brought to his stonework was due to the influence of George Kaiser and the home they built together. And in closing, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell the story of the gingerbread house and to share David's work.
Thank you very much, Mariah.
Yeah.
Okay, something else to add?
Just that if you're interested in learning more, you can find information, photos, and there is some audio of David talking about his rock work at gingerbreadhousebook.com.
Perfect. And we will also mention that CPF's annual fundraising auction is ending today, actually, tonight at midnight. And you will have an opportunity to bid on a special opportunity to talk with Mariah a few more minutes virtually via Zoom, and also receive a signed copy of the Gingerbread House book. So we hope you'll bid on the item. You can visit californiapreservation.org/auction. I think
Thanks, Mariah. That was such a cute story. I'm just in love with it, and thank you so much for your generosity in offering to donate some of the proceeds of the book sale and also the auction item.
Yeah, of course.
And we have about 3 to 4 minutes, and the way we're going to handle questions, if we are able, before we move into the next one with the other Mariah Nielsen, is to cover any questions people may have about the Gingerbread House or the book. So if you have any questions, we can ask those now. Otherwise, if Mariah is willing to hang around until the close, we can ask her those questions later. So I'll keep an eye on the. Were there any that came in, Chris, from the Q&A box?
Not yet. Just we got a comment from Bill Ellinger, who says that that David worked on several projects of mine. What a treasure, and of a man and a craftsman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hi to everybody from Mount Baldy.
You had quite a few people from Mount Baldy actually here in the chat. I saw that were just waiting for you to talk. And I didn't know about that story. Somebody else put that in the chat, that the story isn't as widely known as we would hope. So I'm glad that we could help share this with all of everyone who's tuning in today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me and for having me share the story and for all the work that you guys do.
Yeah, Mariah, if you can hang around, we might have a couple more questions at the end.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to jump right into the next one. And my understanding is I'll be sharing this screen. So give me a second to pull it up here. Oh, I made the mistake of closing it. Give me a second. I have to open it again.
Mariah, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself, Mariah N. Well,
rarely am I on a panel or any sort of Zoom talk with another Mariah. I love it. So my name is Mariah Nielsen. I'm the daughter of the artist J.B. Blunk. I have been the director of my father's estate since 2007. My background is in architecture, and I currently work as a design historian and curator. And I split my time between London in the UK and Inverness, California, where our house is, which is this image here on the screen. And I'm going to be talking about this home that my father built by hand in 1959 and his work, and also the work that I'm doing as the director of the estate. So this image contextualizes the home that my father built in 1959. The house is set on the Inverness Ridge, just above the little town of Inverness in Northern California, about 50 miles north of San Francisco. And he built this house using all salvage materials. But really the way that he ended up at this site is because of his art practice, which started in Japan. So is it possible that I move the slides, John?
You should have control now. If you click once in the screen, it should.
Okay.
There you go. Oh, you know what, Mariah? Let me change this view to slideshow mode, so it'll be
Okay.
easier to advance it. Okay, there you go.
Great.
Might click once more. Yeah.
Here we are. Oh, so my father's art practice started in Japan, where he was stationed actually in Korea during the Korean War, but on weekends he would often travel to Japan during trainings and look for the work of an artist named Shoji Hamada, who was a ceramicist whose work he had come across while studying ceramics at UCLA before being drafted into the Korean War. And it was during a visit to a Minge, a craft shop in Tokyo, looking for Hamada's work, that he just by chance happened to meet the artist Sama Noguchi. They were admiring the same set of Hamada bowls, and they struck up a conversation and became friends. And Noguchi helped my father be discharged from the army and then arrange an apprenticeship with this man here, Toyo Kanishinge. Here he is making the pot. So my father lived and worked in the town called Bizen, which is a few hours south of Tokyo, for a few years. He learned how to speak Japanese and immersed himself in the place and culture, and learned how to make ceramics with this Japanese national treasure, master potter. After several years living with Toyo Kanishige, my father returned to California. Here he is with some of the ceramics that he made while apprenticing. So in 1956, my father returned to California, and after working in LA for a few years, he and his first wife, Nancy Waite, moved up to the Bay Area. And it was at this point that my father wrote to Sama Noguchi and asked if he had any friends or any connections to people in the Bay Area who needed work or needed help with any projects. My father was looking for work. He and Nancy had very little money. And Noguchi introduced him to this artist, Gordon Onslow Ford, who had just bought about 50 acres of land in the town Inverness, north of San Francisco. And Gordon was in the process of building a home that had been designed by Warren Callister, a Berkeley-based architect. So my father started working on this house with Gordon, and during the process of construction, they became close friends. And it was during this project that Gordon offered my father an acre of land just up the road from his home, where he and Nancy could build a home for their family. At this point, they had two boys, my brothers Bruno and Rufus. And here they are on the lawn. So in 1959, with around $1,000, they had very little money, they started working on the home that was built from all salvage materials. So the materials were sourced from local scrap yards, from barns that were being dismantled in Petaluma and Santa Rosa, from redwood piers that were being pulled up from Sausalito docks. And the construction started in 59 and finished around 1962. And Nancy built the home with him. So it was very much a collaborative project between the two. And here's the home on the ridge looking out over Tomales Bay with Black Mountain in the distance. And you can see a lot of Japanese influence in the architecture from my father's time living and working in Japan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mariah, that was my fault. I had to click out of the screen.
That's okay. That's all right. So here's the inside of the home. My father built everything in the house, the furniture, doors, door handles, the ceramics that we use to eat and drink from. To the right is the scrap wall, which is a wonderful feature in the home that he built using scraps and fall-offs from large-scale redwood sculptures. He kept the pieces and then put this sort of puzzle wall together. We see some of his stools and a large black sculpture, as well as a weaving of my mother's. So this photo is probably from the early 80s. And the next image is of this beautiful redwood sink that he carved, single piece of wood that's still intact and in use in the home. It's held up really well. He carved this in 1962. You can also see the soap dish that he made for our soap. That's also still there. Here's the kitchen with ceramics and bowls that he made. And in the early 60s, he started to make furniture using a chainsaw, which was really the only tool that he had on hand. So his practice expanded from ceramics to woodwork, sculpture, and furniture. And by the late 60s, he was receiving commissions for large-scale public works like this piece that's still on site at UC Santa Cruz. This is called Blunk's Hunk, and it's carved from a single piece of redwood burl. His work also included furniture, like this redwood stool, stone sculpture, painting, ceramics, and also jewelry. And here he is in his studio with some of his sculptures. This photo is probably from the late 80s. So he died in 2002, and my mother moved away from the area in about 2004. And around 2007, I started to renovate the home. Houses that are not lived in or cared for in the woods and in this very wet climate need a lot of maintenance and attention. So there was quite a lot of work to do. The deferred maintenance and just stacked up over years. So we started renovating the home, and then in 2007, I set up the J.B. Blunk Residency, which was an artist residency program that we ran from 2007 to 2011. So the program invited 4 artists a year to come and live and work in the home for 2 months at a time. And this was a project that we organized with the nonprofit Lucid Art Foundation that Gordon Onslow Ford was one of the founders of. Here's Max Lamb, a British artist who we invited in 2009. He dug clay from some of the same local places that my father had dug clay and made this incredible set of ceramics. The program was open to all different artists, writers, painters, ceramicists, sculptors. Here are Max's ceramics that he made. Here's Jenna Didier, an architect from LA who was inspired by JB's stonework, learned how to use a stone grinder, and made an incredible series of stone sculptures while she was in residence. And the artist Jay Nelson made this really whimsical piece that was a surf boat. He's doing some incredible cabin architecture actually in Hawaii and around the United States and also in France. And here's the home today. So in 2011, the residency program closed. My mother moved back into the home, and I moved to London for graduate school. So at this point, the home is a family home that I share with my husband and son and my mother and stepfather. And we are constantly inviting friends who are artists and designers to live and work in the studio. Here's the front door. And some details of the inside was painting by my father and a sculptural stool of his made from redwood. Here's the kitchen with some of his redwood stools. And this is the house as it looks today. Some of his sculptures and furniture. That sink. And here's a photo of the the outside of the studio. So the studio he built the same time as the home, and it's just about 20 feet away from the house. So he had a really easy commute from the home to the workshop. And he was a prolific artist. He worked 7 days a week. And here's the studio, more or less as it looks today. I think this photo was taken a few years ago. a lot of wood. And so the work that I'm doing involves documenting and archiving all of the material, continuing to maintain the home, make repairs. This is Kaisa, a graphic designer that I've been working with. We just finished the first book about my father's life and work called JB Blunk. She spent several weeks going through the archives and JB's library. This is Jess, who helps me manage the estate. Here we are working on an exhibition. So that's another part of the work, is organizing shows of my father's collection. And we work with several galleries in the US and one here in London. And here's our friend Daniel Dent photographing all the work. So this is also something we do regularly, is document and add to the digital archive pieces that we come across. And here's the book that we just published in May of this year. And the home. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, Mariah. At this point, we're going to have everybody, all of our speakers, re-enable their videos if they're present. And we're going to dive into some questions. This is amazing. Every one of you kept not only on time, but ahead of time, which means we have plenty of time for questions. So thank you all. And I think I'll pass it off to my colleague, Chris, to start with the first question. And I have one, but I'm going to wait until she asks hers.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Thanks, John. So Lloyd, I wanted to, we did get a question in here. Now I've lost it. I think it was about, why did you find that domes were such a failure in your experience? You'd mentioned that at the beginning of your presentation.
Well, if somebody really wants to know, if you go to our website, which is shelterpub.com, word shelter, P-U-B, and go down to the bottom and click on domes. I published a newsprint a brochure, a booklet called Refried Domes, which explained all the reasons I thought the domes didn't work. One thing is leakage. The entire building is a roof. And it can be solved if you want to have an entire building covered with asphalt shingles. The circular, we ended up calling it circle madness because of our attraction to circles and domes. But fitting a bed or a refrigerator or all those things are rectangular. So when you try to fit those into a circle, it's very difficult. If you want to add on to a dome, if I want to add on to a rectilinear building with a vertical wall, I just build a roof off of the wall. But if you want to add on to a dome, you have to tie into multiple facets. And the same thing on subdividing them inside. But anyway, there are many more reasons that I think the domes don't make good homes, even though they were the countercultural icon of building back in the 60s and 70s. But as I said, go to our website and there's quite a bit of information. I think there's 10 reasons that I wrote that and when you have to admit that you're wrong out in front of 250,000 people, it's difficult to do, but ever since I did that, I haven't been afraid to say that I was wrong. And people sort of think that you're going to stick with something that you advocate. But I didn't. I said, these are the reasons I think they don't work. And hey, look, I discovered stud frame building rectangles after 5 years of building domes. So, but it's a question I get asked quite a bit. So
I'd like to second Lloyd's sentiments there. I grew up in a dome because my father erected a dome in the late 60s on our property for my two brothers. And it was in an interview from the 70s, my father said, erecting the dome was the greatest mistake of my adult life. It was a nightmare. The maintenance was a nightmare. Like you're saying, Lloyd, you could never fit furniture in there. It always felt awkward. It was too hot. It was too cold. So I took the dome down in 2006, no regrets.
They work as theaters or maybe a meditation chamber, or I have seen domes that work. And actually, I was at your dad's house probably in the 60s. I came over there with Sim van der Rijn, and I was really impressed by everything up there. And I'm really happy to see that you are keeping it going. A wonderful guy. Inspiration.
Thanks, Lloyd.
That's great that you said you went to that house. I was going to ask you what I also have the same problem in this A-frame a little bit because all the walls are angled. And where do you put your kitchen cabinets? There's no place, and there's no place to hang pictures. Mariah, did you find anything like that in your cabin experience? The problems with the irregularities of the walls and the stone, and how you just live a regular life in a building like that?
I was very jealous of all of my friends in school that had square walls for their bedroom where they could hang their posters. I wasn't allowed to use like push pins or anything in the walls because they were all like, this beautiful wood that my dad had this story about. Well, I got that wood from here and this wood from there. So like, don't ruin it by putting pins and stuff in it. So definitely that. And then also, there's just a lot going on with my parents' roof as far as steeples and changes. And every time you have, one angle coming to another angle, it's like asking for a leak. So there was definitely lots of times my dad standing there with like a hose trying to like get the leak to happen so that he could try to fix it.
I came to the conclusion, and I advised people that don't build your house from an abstract concept like I want a 7-sided house or I want a circular house or an ellipse. I came to the conclusion I wanted a house that would be practical, where I chose the materials and they were aesthetically pleasing, but that I could get done quickly and then go on with my life. And that's kind of what I have advocated for people from that experience on. With the building. We built 17 geodesic domes at Pacific High School in the Santa Cruz Mountains in the 60s, trying all different kinds of materials. And so I really did give it a try. But nowadays, I think that unless you want to spend, a lot longer and a lot more money, pick something simple and practical rather than something idealistic, which is going to be difficult to bring into reality.
That's a great point, Lloyd, and I'll segue that into a question that somebody had, or maybe also a comment and a question, because this whole period that both Mariah Nielsen and Lloyd and Mariah Shokai have all talked about is that period of experimentation in architecture, right? That time when everybody was trying new things, and maybe the representation of that is the work that Buckminster Fuller was trying out, and some of these other sort of these Futuro houses and all these sort of experimental pieces of architecture. So Jim is asking, what would Buckminster Fuller say about roofs and angles? So we're interested in hearing your thoughts on what do you think he would have said about that?
Well, Bucky didn't like rectangular buildings. I mean, he was very influential with me and my friends until I really got soured on him. He didn't invent the geodesic dome. It was invented in Germany in the 1920s, but he patented it, and it sounded good. More space, the most space for the least materials, but a lot of that space isn't really usable. But I came to a parting of the ways with Bucky in more ways than one, and so he favored he thought, and also the idea that you're going to put this geodesic dome on any building site without regard to orientation or where the wind comes from or where the sun rises and sets. And so I just think that that's the wrong idea. I think he had a lot of really bad ideas, including the dome over New York City. So don't get me started on Buckminster Fuller. You can actually see that in the book Shelter, which we did in 1973. There's a big section on Bucky and on the true inventor of the geodesic dome, and we sort of covered it there.
So to follow on that, Lloyd, I think what we want to ask you is in all your work and the work that you've done both on your house and other work, what do you think is the greatest challenge that you've faced in designing something?
I don't know if I have thought of anything being a challenge in that sense. I mean, what I say to people and my MO and just about everything is, if you're not sure what to do, start. And once you get started with a project like building a house, you'll figure it out once you get the momentum going. So I don't know. Yeah, a big challenge that we had when I moved down to Big Sur with two carpenter friends to a 400-acre ranch to build a house out of very large bridge timbers. That was a real challenge. I mean, we had to splice together 16-foot long 8x22s to make up a 30-foot long, 32-foot long rafter. And we had to figure out how to they weighed a half a ton apiece. So we had to figure out how to get those things up in place. And the whole job was a challenge. And, but I don't know, I don't think in those terms, about the work that I've done. It's just sort of get started and keep going, and you'll be surprised that really happens in anything. We have a new bookkeeper in our office who came in for the first day yesterday, and I thought, how are we gonna start here? How am I gonna tell her all the stuff to do here, half of which I don't understand? And so we just started. And after a couple hours, we were in a groove and we were figuring things out. So that's my advice. Just start.
Thanks, Lloyd. I had a question for Mariah N. That sink is amazing. How do you clean a wood sink? I actually have a wood shower. So tell me, how do you work on that wood sink?
We have a soft bristled Japanese brush, and you just use a little water and scrub it maybe once a week, and that works just fine. It's actually pretty low maintenance. I've had to repair the sink about 3 times since my father carved it, and it's actually carved out of cypress. I said redwood, but realized it's cypress. My father first started making pieces, sculptures and furniture with cypress and eucalyptus, and then came across redwood in the late 60s, and that became his wood of choice. And I think, knowing my father, he probably would have used redwood if he had the exposure or experience working with it, but it's cypress. So we've had to carve out patches of rot over the years and basically plug it with redwood. So now there's these sweet sort of scars in the sink, 3 or 4 plugs that we've had to add to it over the years. But yeah, just a little brush. That's it.
And it's also very Japanese, isn't it? To incorporate the damage almost. You incorporate that as part of the texture and the character of the piece.
Yeah.
He built one.
It's a character.
He built a sink for Sim van der Rijn that I saw at Sim's house, like similar to that, not quite as big, but
that's right. Yep.
Yeah. I would think that there'd be a little problem with the drain at the bottom, that would have to be caulked every once in a while, or.
Yeah, that's happened. I think there's been about 4 replacements.
The other Mariah, I wanted to ask you, what's the roofing material on your dad's build? Is that slate, or is that asphalt shingles?
It's asphalt shingles, and each one of those shingles were hand cut by my dad. I think it was partially because I think I remember reading in a journal entry, so not 100% sure, but I think he got a deal, but it wasn't all the same color. And then it also worked out because he kind of sold it to the Forest Service, because it's on Forest Service land, as kind of sitting back and reflecting the dappled light that comes through the trees. So that's kind of how he got away with using the multiple color roofing segments.
That's nice. So I wanted to ask you, Mariah Jade, one of our final questions, but what do you find challenging about when you did own the house? Did you find the most challenging about keeping it, preserving it? It seemed to have a lot of different materials in juxtaposition.
I mean, my dad, when he was around, he was always fixing something. I think that's just the nature of having an older house. And but he kind of loved it. I mean, that became his line of work after he finished that house. So I don't think it was really work for him. But I would say probably the roof. It was maintaining the roof and keeping up with all the wood that, I mean, there was just so much wood in the house, making sure that the combination of water and wood, that the wood stayed dry and stayed in good condition and stayed painted. You know, I feel like there was every spring my dad was up on some high ladder, like, you know, painting something to make sure that it, you know, stood up to weather. So.
Yeah, over here at my house, we do the Frank Lloyd Wright treatment. We just put the bucket underneath the drip, and then that's all there is to it. We need to close out, but I wanted to thank you all for your time today and all of your expertise. I really appreciated it. And just a reminder that Mariah has an item in our auction item of the copy of the book, and also an opportunity to speak with her by Zoom for 30 minutes, which I might actually bid on, Mariah, because I think that we have a lot in common. I might want to just get a little chat with you on Zoom.
Yeah.
So that's at californiapreservation.org/auction. And let's see, I'll start with Mariah. And where can people get in touch with you? Do you have an Instagram or a Facebook?
We have a website, jbblunt.com, and
Okay.
there's a contact there. So it's mariah@jbblunt.com. But if you go to the website and the contact section, you can get a hold of me.
jbblunt.com. I'm just putting, there, I was going to say, did John beat me to putting that in the chat? And then, and then Lloyd, I've been sharing your website with everyone, but do you have anything else, any other social media, or any other place people can get in touch with you?
Instagram. I do Instagram, and I have a blog.
Okay.
And I have trouble keeping up with all of it. And actually, just one last thing, I'm going out now with a spatula and a can of Henry's roof patch because I had a leak in the office here the other day. But it's the first leak I've had in years. So, but anyway, it's you know, building a house and maintaining it is an ongoing. It never ends. You know, because all the elements are conspiring, including, you know, termites and ants and rats and foxes and possums to get stuff from you or to eat away at stuff. So it's an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. And then Mariah J., where can everyone reach you? And do you have Instagram or Facebook you want to share?
There's a website for the book, gingerbreadhousebook.com. You can email me. It's located at the bottom of the page is the link to an email, info@gingerbreadhousebook.com. Also, I think it's the Gingerbread House Book on Facebook and Gingerbread House Book on Instagram.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, John, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'll just mention that the background you see behind me, that's also an auction item. So Southern Oregon cabin built by my own dad. So feel free to bid on it. I'm looking forward to seeing what sort of competition comes of that. But I wanted to thank our speakers finally. And also, I'm pasting in the chat box an evaluation form. We love to hear what people think about our programs, but more importantly, what you want to see in future programs. If you have any suggestions, we'd love to see that. So thanks again, everybody. We really appreciate your time, and happy holidays.
Yes, happy
Thanks,
holidays. We'll
Jonathan.
see everybody in 2021 with our all new programming. Oh, and I see Mimi Fisher has raised her hand. I'm not sure if she had a question, John, if you want to check that. I wanted to tell you all as we close out that John and I do joke that it is the Cabin Preservation Foundation instead of California Preservation Foundation, because both of us are always in our cabins. So anyways, have a great holiday, everyone, and we'll see you on the flip side next year.